You're listening to the Art Said podcast, Season 2, Episode number 3, Creative Collaboration. Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose. All right, welcome back, everybody. Edric and I are here today to kind of give you a follow-up discussion of our conversation with Purple that we had. Hopefully you just listened to that episode, and we're going to kind of dig into some of the things she said and break them down and talk a little bit more, because there was so many good things that she discussed that we felt like we wanted to kind of talk more about it.
Right. I think is this our first brunch conversation? It's
It might
lunch.
be.
Yeah,
It is usually, yes, it is usually lunch. I think it's our first ever brunch conversation.
There we go.
Yeah. So one of the first things she talked about was the difference between teaching artists working in a variety of settings and art teachers working in a very specific setting, which in our case is public schools, but it could be private schools or different varieties. But, those are different. They have to really be adaptable to their environment because they're very different settings.
Right. So, yeah, a teaching artist is invited into a variety of different circumstances, community centers, wherever they're called to, study centers. And so they are there to kind of facilitate whatever it is that's going on already. It's a similar thing in public school. It's more codified, though, I think, in public schools in terms of what arts teachers do. So we, as arts teachers, are more conscripted, I guess, in some ways. You have the curriculum, you have all these expectations. You have the district goals and all those sorts of things. So teaching artists are coming in from a different place. And so I think it's kind of the point of this is to, if you're working with a teaching artist, to understand that. So what you're going to want to do is you have to collaborate with them to get them to understand that it's really about a certain way of looking at what you're teaching and connecting it to whatever the curriculum is or the learning objectives are.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think that you have to inform them of your situation and be willing to listen to theirs and find where those connection points are and find where the gaps are on both sides so that you can kind of fill in those gaps together.
Yeah, so as an example, when you asked Purple to introduce herself, she started by talking about where she was from, right? Identity. And as a young Black woman from the Bronx and this hip hop culture, and just began describing the neighborhood and her parents being her first teachers. And so that was interesting to me, as opposed to talking about titles. Whereas typically in education, you say, well, I'm the director of so-and-so, and I work with this, and I'm on the board for this.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
So it was really about who she was internally. These are internal qualifiers and not external qualifiers. And I think that's rooted also in the way she teaches, in terms of realizing it's about these kids' identity and who they are and what their voice is. And so, because she comes from that place, she speaks to that. But externally, she did mention, though, she was a health education major, basketball player, right?
Yeah, which, by the way, I had no idea, and I've known her for years. It blew my mind.
What's really funny to me, though, is she looks like my niece, Tanisha. I never said that to her, and then when she said basketball, I was like, no, because Tanisha was also a basketball. She won a scholarship. It is Tanisha. So there's that, but. So being a health education major later, and then going from physical health to community health. So those two things.
Yeah, she really did. She's done that really well.
Yeah. So the understanding of community health and the way that health underlies her practice as a teacher, as an artist, and as an educator. And also, just early on, she talked about being, as a kid growing up, being very, very shy, right?
Yeah.
And being aware of environments that would either silence her or let her speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge as a kid, because I think I was I was a nerd kid. I'm ADD. My brain's running 1,000 miles an hour. I can't slow down to have a conversation with people. It's like, and you appreciate these teachers that are able somehow, help you understand that, or communities. And that's what she also talked about when she described her identity. She called them circles, right? Communities are circles that invite you in to be a member, to participate. And what I like about that is, I think that I once had this riff. I was writing this essay about what true cool is. What does it mean to be truly cool? And I felt like true cool is inclusive. It's not exclusive. Like if you're in a room with somebody that a lot of people think is cool, you feel cool too. Right? You're not excluded from the cool, right? So whereas when people that are more exclusive, like, I'm cool and you're not, like that's not, it's not how it should work.
I also liked that she talked about her circles,
Yes.
because I think the word community can
Right.
sometimes be politicized and have things attached to it that aren't a part of the conversation, right? That aren't a part of the work we're trying to do. And so by shifting that to the word, the different circles that she was in, kind of got rid of any stigmas or got rid of things and really honed in on what she was connecting with, what was in her inner, like when people talk about their inner circle, right?
Right.
That I feel like it kind of goes towards that more than, and that beefs up that inclusivity versus exclusive.
And I think when you talk about circles, you're talking about sharing.
Yes,
There's a
yes,
shared sense of identity, shared sense of power.
absolutely.
I'm gonna give you what I have. You're gonna share with me what you have, and that's
I'm
really
open to hearing what you have, even if it's different from what I have. 100%.
right. And
Absolutely.
and so as she talked about her different teachers, I felt like what she was identifying was that the teachers are people that really see you and help you discover what your skills are, or you amplify your voice, or your sense of identity, or your sense of agency, a sense of being able to move through the world. And I think that I thought it was a very positive way of looking at how you think of as a teacher, because she mentioned her parents, she mentioned her brother,
Right.
she mentioned, I remember the bus driver, like, hey,
Yeah.
your report card. I'll tell you what, for every A you get, I'll give you $1.
Right.
But again, that community, that sense of the people, that circle of people that will share with you.
Well, and that really pulls in the social emotional learning movement that's going on in schools, and really trying to see our students and how many of our students are acting out and who are not behaving, who aren't making good choices. And a lot of that is that they don't feel seen, they don't have a connection, and so they're doing that to get attention, to try to force a connection, even if it's in the wrong way that they're approaching it, because they're a child.
That's what
And there are
Adrian,
many adults that don't approach those things the right way either, by the way. I will state that.
but that, I think is what Adrian talked about at the conference when she talked about the troublemaker.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. The class
take
clown.
the class clown. Yeah, take a look at that kid. Look,
Yeah.
there's something in there.
Yeah.
So another mentor that Purple mentioned, though, was a woman named Toni Blackman, who was a mentor that helped her in terms of her teaching. So she invited her to teach hip hop lyricism at the Newark Student Learning Center, right?
Right.
And she said, "Well, I don't come from a background in education. What do I do?" And she
Mm-hmm.
said, "Listen, how did you learn? How did you learn how to do this? So teach from the way that you work. However it was you learned, break that down into a system, and then teach that."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I connected with that because that's how you and I, Edric, approached arts integration in our schools.
right.
We figured out what's the entry point with a teacher who is not an arts person, right? How do they connect with it? And then go from there.
Right.
So when you are collaborating with others, it's finding that connection that brings you together, and then work through that. Don't worry about, you know, the teacher's like, oh, I can't dance, or I'm not comfortable doing that. It's like, well, what are you comfortable with? What do you connect with, and find that little seed that you can then grow.
And then what is it you're trying to teach? What are the objectives? So then what are the
Right.
connections between the two disciplines? Where's that work?
Right.
And also, don't force it. Let's find a
No.
natural thing that works, that
Yes,
makes
because it will not work. It will flop. You cannot force it. We've been doing this for, oh my gosh, how long?
yeah, yeah.
12 years
Let's just say
probably, or so.
let's just say 10.
All right, more than that though. And trust us in all that time. Like, you cannot force something to work. Like, it just won't. It
But
won't.
it,
And you
it
can
has,
have all good intentions in the world, but like,
and it
yeah,
has to be modified. I mean, I think think of
100%.
the projects we did one year that didn't work, and we're like, you know what, we got to change this. This has we did, we forgot this, and yeah. So
Yeah, and we needed to find that thing that made it come to life and made it work. And you
right.
just kind of got to be willing to play.
And sometimes that's really about the clientele. It's really about
Right.
because you and I were both at the middle school, and then we were at
Right.
the elementary school, and they're different in terms of the way you have
Very.
the content and who the clientele is, and what's already there inside the student.
Yep.
Like, to get back to Purple, what I really appreciate, so she talked about moving from place to place, right? So
Yes.
you this hip hop culture, this culture of being the boroughs, New York, the Bronx, and then you move out to other places. So she talked about being from the Bronx, then moving to New Jersey, then to North Carolina, and then slowly realizing that each place has its own unique cultural identity and lessons to be learned, right? So the
Right.
things we learned from that was just to be open,
Yeah.
because there's information, there are experiences here. Don't be like, well, we don't do it like that where I come from. It's like, It's like,
And that
no,
might be true, but like be open to hearing a different way that you might be able to then evolve where you come from and how you do it to make it even better.
right. And so, and I think, so the arts for her were a gateway, right? As what she
Right.
learned through all these different experiences of a quick way to embrace and connect with culture and with young people. Okay, from Carolina then to Mark Katz. Mark Katz is a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who created the Hip Hop Embassy. And
Yep.
which, and so now you're talking about hip hop as a culture, as a worldwide culture, because the music is everywhere.
Right.
Music gets there way before before anything else does. Um, and so she becomes an ambassador of hip hop culture for kids, and she's doing projects in India and Barbados, right?
Right.
And
And
so
probably many other places she didn't mention, by the way.
exactly. But what's beautiful about that was she said, so the first thing she does is like, well, show me what you do, because there's
Right.
already a culture there. You don't walk in saying I am the representative, I am officially the You walk in saying, well, what do you guys do? How do you guys do it? What do you connect to? What are you talking about?
Right.
What's important to you? And that is, I think, the way that it should work, because when you do
In
that,
every classroom, not just with international classrooms, right?
yep,
Letting our kids have the time to show us what they do, where do they come from, what backgrounds do they have, and then being willing to share what you have to offer them and find those connection points.
right, and then finding a way to work from that.
Yes.
You don't
Yes.
push, again, same thing. You don't push it on them. You find out where they're at. You find out what you have. You find out where to connect. And so, what I think is great about arts teachings, like the arts integration, it's those four C's, right? It's communication, collaboration, creativity, connection. Because it's like it doesn't matter, what how things change. I'm saying we're educating for the future, right? We're educating these kids for the future, and we don't know what is going to be here, what's not. We don't know how technology is going to change. We don't know what the work is. I mean, when I was in high school 40 years ago, I mean, the idea of a user interface designer, there was no such thing, right?
Right.
I wish I'd known.
Right. I
But
hated writing papers in school. Man, if only AI existed back then. Even not to write my papers for me, by the way, to give me a place to start,
right,
to give me the confidence to start.
so independent of whatever the technology makes available, you're still going to
Right.
be. You still have to communicate. You still
Yes.
have to collaborate. You
Yep.
still have some elements of creativity. You still got to figure out what the connections are. So those things are always there with the arts, right? Kids
Yep.
already have expression. And again, so what I also appreciate about that is, you talk about different narratives in public education. One of them is, the work should be more student centered as opposed to teacher centered, and that's the great way to go about it. So if you're connecting through the arts and their particular expression, then you have that. I also want to touch on the arts integration lesson she did with Kara Walters at Seagert School, which I thought
Yeah,
was ideal. Like that was a model lesson of arts
it was.
integration. They did it over a course of 2 years. So Kara Walker, the teachers, invites her in to do a project specifically, has to do with a unit on persuasive argumentation, right?
Right.
Persuasive.
And she Purple went in there as a teaching artist, which I think a lot of teachers haven't had that experience working with a teaching artist. But I think that they also should consider their arts educators in their school quasi teaching artists in a way, right? I think that there are some connections. Yes, they're a little bit different because many arts educators aren't working as full-time artists in
Mhm.
whatever art form they're in, right? But I think that they can connect with that.
Well, I think the point being, as you were saying earlier, you have to figure out how to have that conversation to find out where,
Yes.
where the two places are between the
Yeah.
arts. Because, again, the teachers you're working with sometimes have those very kind of narrow idea of what it is you're doing. If they think the art is the artist, if they think you're just decorating, or if they think music is just, entertainment, they don't
Right.
understand there are disciplines that go, there are skill sets that are there that connect.
Right.
But I think she did understand. So Carol Walters did understand this. So she invites Purple in. She chooses the particular place. And I think the great thing is it starts with, well, let's make an agreement that we're going to make something together.
And it's
Let's
that
agree.
simple, by the way. It's that simple. Let's just agree we're going to create something. Like,
Yeah. And so I think not again. It's not a lesson. It's not a script you're following. It's something you're working together. Um, so you're gonna have to communicate. You're gonna have to modify. You're gonna change some things. So go through. I think it's like you have to experience this creative process if you're gonna teach it.
yes.
So so arts integration is also for teachers as much as it's for students.
Mm-hmm.
Discovering this process and then teaching the
Absolutely.
process you're discovering. So Purple was invited into Google Classroom, so she saw the work that was being done before she even got there.
Right.
She was able to offer suggestions.
And
As a,
by the way, utilizing technology to make when Purple came in and when this happened better and more useful is what how you should use technology. There's, if they waited till Purple got there and then the kids all had to share what they've been doing and she had to sift through it and then decide what she was going to do, that's not going to be an effective use of her time or the kids' time, right? By being able to go in there and do that pre-work behind the scenes so she could best meet those students' needs where they're at is what was really successful. And we should leverage technology to have those things happen. How many times have we heard teachers, well, if we can't co-teach, then this won't work.
right.
You don't need to co-teach every lesson. Like you could be doing stuff and share it technology, and technically you're still co-teaching, right? And then you make more out of the moments when you can come together.
Right. Yeah, and it makes the lesson deeper in that. So the artist is able to take a look at what it is you're teaching and have a
Right.
sense of where these kids are at. So there was already a unit on persuasive argument. There's already pre-existing knowledge of what poetry is, what rhyming is, different ways to structure a stanza, things about rap
Right.
music. All that stuff was already there. She could see it in the document and comment on it as it was going. Then what they did was they had topics that the kids chose
Right.
that they can talk about. And before and so this is all being done before they even start thinking about music and rhyming and how they're going to put their performances or how they're
Right.
going to do this, which is great. So they grouped the kids by topic, and then they had a leftover kind of miscellaneous category of kids.
Yeah.
And so what they did was they put them all together, and they said, "Okay, you guys figure it out," which I thought was a great lesson in collaboration and creativity because they had to make it up. They had to figure out how to make this thing work. Um, all those again important. So I thought it was great, just a great example of how an arts integration lesson should work and how a content teacher can find ways to work with an arts teacher, either a visiting artist or one of the arts teachers in your school or in your district. And then towards the end of it, I just asked her, like, how do you keep doing this work?
Yeah.
Because especially as we're getting into a new year of teaching, new school year. It's like, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay interested? I think everybody has different things they go to, but I was curious. I
Right.
always like to ask this question about, like, what is it? What does it for you? Um, and she said that the first thing she went to was the idea of culturally responsive education, right?
Right.
And the question she was asking, what does it take to be brave enough to be seen and to be heard, right? And then how do you create a space where students' voices can be heard and they can have the feel safe enough to share them, right? Um, and she quoted a couple of teachers, Tony Blackman, again, her mentor, who invited her in to do the hip hop lyricism class where she really started this.
Right.
Said, you have to be healthy to be working with kids.
And that is
And
so true. You learned that the hard way, Edric.
well, it's two levels. It's like
Yes.
one is psychologically, you have to be free of that kid that reminds you of that kid you hated in seventh grade. I had that experience of, like, I couldn't figure out why I was upset with this particular kid. And I was, oh, he's just like so and so from. So there's all this stuff that you have in your history, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much you
Yes.
do,
Your baggage.
your baggage, but
Yeah.
there's also just for me, it was like physically. So going from high
Right.
school to teaching elementary school, just it's so much more physical. Like
Yes.
I was literally sick and tired for a while. Uh,
Yes, you were, until you realized it and you're like, oh my gosh,
yeah, I got
I have to invest more time in my physical health.
yeah, I gotta walk. So I walk, I run, I'm planking in the morning.
Look at you.
Because I had to go see the chiropractor. Um, so the other thing she said was that youth is very short, relatively in your life. It's a short period, and it should be celebrated and enjoyed. I think it's important for teachers to hear. Sometimes you're in the same place all the time, but it's brand new for these kids.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna be a long time that they have this youth.
No.
So respect it, appreciate it, and find and help them enjoy it as much as possible. And then that one quote, I can't remember what she couldn't remember where it came from, but it's a great quote. It's easier to build a child than to repair an adult.
No true words have been stated, by the way.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And then she also says, I'm not the answer to all the problems. I'm not, but I do have the ability to pour some water on this seed, right? And then she said the kids, they plant seeds in her, and so it's this mutual thing, and that's what I love about.
Yeah, and I think that's like sometimes we expect as teachers, we're expected to always have the answers. And I've always been very upfront with my students, like, no, I don't have the answers. What do you think? What do you feel? And giving kids that space is a really hard shift to happen. There might be tears. because they're not used to it. They're not being a right or a wrong or yes or no, or yeah, just give me the answer and then we can move on. To have to kind of like be more introspective and know that we're invested in their development and where they want it to go, I think is sadly a concept that often is not prevalent in education.
Well, it's uncomfortable.
Everybody else's agendas and not focused on the student.
It's uncomfortable, and I try to dig into it as much as possible. I mean, I let the uncomfortable space happen. But even
Mhm.
when I'm teaching as an art teacher,
Right.
I let my kids struggle.
Absolutely.
I let them sit there and struggle. Like,
You have to. You can't like hold their hand all the time and make everything easy
right, right,
because that's not life.
yeah. So in conclusion,
In conclusion,
my thing is that I think the teaching and learning go together, right?
yep,
And you're moving along this path, and it's about continuing to create and not just parking somewhere, not just having a standard way that you do these things, but understanding, you got to modify it, you got to change it, and you got to keep it. You have to stay interested somehow.
we have to evolve. Our practice has to be evolve, and it's really that like lifelong learner mindset of like constantly evolving and being willing to evolve with your students because
Yeah,
they're changing
but it's also,
every year.
again, but that teacher collaboration thing, it's a creative thing.
Yeah.
It's not a blueprint.
Nope.
Um, it's really the working together.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this breakdown of our conversation and kind of pulling out some real gems and highlights of our when we chatted with Purple. We will see you next time.
Do